Welcome to Solutions OP Clinical Trials Podcast. My name is Olga and I'm the Managing Director of Solutions OP. We're a small team of experienced professionals working on clinical trials in the United Kingdom. I'll use our podcast to discuss hot topics in clinical trials and provide analysis of the latest trends and challenges in pharma and medical device industries, not just in the UK but globally. Thank you for listening. Welcome to the latest episode of the podcast. As I started the series from the latest symposium from FDA, MHRA and Health Canada, we'll discuss different topics in different podcast episodes. And today we are going to cover with my colleague Lydia Ainsworth the third day of the symposium, which happened back in June. And on that third day, they were discussing pharmacovigilance. So I will give you a bit of an update on the latest developments from the regulators on pharmacovigilance, any initiatives that they have, and we'll discuss with Lydia artificial intelligence use in pharmacovigilance. And of course, she'll share with us some practical experience because she's done a lot of reconciliation of serious adverse events, and she has a lot of hands-on experience working with data. So she will give us an overview at the end of challenges that she has seen and what could potentially be a problem if you're using artificial intelligence in your drug safety assessment. So the first part is the regulatory initiative. So we have some good news. FDA, MHRA and Health Canada, they have quarterly meetings where they meet and discuss different initiatives on how to review and assess drug safety. In addition, Health Canada and MHRA, they have a pilot project which is ongoing. These are joint inspections between the two regulators, and the idea is to reduce the overall burden for the industry of inspections from different regulators, and also to facilitate better the existing resources and to share knowledge between the regulators. So their final goal is to create some kind of mutual recognition procedure. So basically, if you have inspection from MHRA and you want to submit your data to Health Canada to get the product approved in Canada, Health Canada will accept the inspection that was performed by MHRA and the outcome of the inspection, and vice versa. If you have a drug approved in Canada and you want to come to the UK, MHRA will accept the inspection that they have performed on your pharmacovigilance system. So I think that's a really positive thing, and we hope that we'll see more collaboration between the different regulators. Now, those of you who are up to date with what is happening will know that FDA just informed us they're going to release updated guidelines on artificial intelligence in pharmacovigilance. So we'll see what FDA will come up with, but it's definitely a hot topic at the moment for many regulators, and I think for many people in the industry who are trying to streamline their pharmacovigilance processes. Another thing from FDA is they presented during that third day of the symposium information about good pharmacovigilance practice expert circle. So this is an international collaboration between 38 countries, which include US, Canada, Australia, Europe, some countries in South America, Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. And the idea is that they will create some kind of harmonization on how drug safety is assessed between the different regulators in the different regions. And I think this is really positive development. Because it will be fantastic if everyone is looking for the same things and they consider the same things important when they review the safety profile of a new drug. Then the second part was about artificial intelligence use in pharmacovigilance, and that's been covered quite extensively during that day. There were a lot of presentations, so I'm not going to cover everything that they discussed. Obviously, you can listen to it if you want. So what I'm going to mention is that the Council for International Organizations of Medical Scientists, also known as SIOMS, is an international organization which was established by WHO and UNESCO. And they provide regular guidelines which aim to harmonize different processes, including terminology that is used in clinical research. So one of their guidelines was about artificial intelligence and its use in drug safety. I think it's important to understand how we collect drug safety information. So normally this happens as part of clinical trials where the physicians report to the pharma company serious adverse events, which are then assessed and reported to the regulators. Once the drug is approved on the market, the physicians and the patients using the drug have opportunity to report any serious adverse events directly to the pharma companies or to the regulators. These reports, which were submitted to the pharma companies, are then again assessed by them and reported to the regulators when it's relevant. So this is how the pharmacovigilance and drug safety reporting works. So based on that, I'll try to explain the challenges there are and the opportunities with using artificial intelligence. So the first part is to start with how we can use artificial intelligence in drug safety. As I just explained, we have individual case safety reports, which could be assessed by artificial intelligence for different things. They could be used to create a database with adverse events that you have, serious adverse events that you have reported for the drug. You can use them to artificial intelligence to create a narrative for your report based on the information of the individual case safety reports. You can have a narrative which you can then use to create a report for the regulators. You can use also artificial intelligence to assess causality based on the drug profile and what is known so far. That's something that could be done by AI. Another thing is medical coding. So in order for us to compare data between different regions, every medical term is coded, so with a specific code. So that medical coding, rather than doing it manually, it could be done by AI, which could definitely streamline your process, especially if you think about any big drugs, oncology drugs, where they have a lot of adverse events. It will be very helpful if you can have some kind of tool that you can use. So that's another thing that you can use it for medical codings, for, as I said, generating narratives, also for assessing causality. So causality is assessed not only by the physician at the hospital, but it's also assessed by the pharma company. And in this particular case, you can use the AI tool to potentially assess causality for different adverse events reported to the company. And another thing that you can use artificial intelligence is product labels. So as we know, the information on the label and that beautiful leaflet that goes into the box of your drug, that label and information leaflet is created based on the latest information of the product, safety information. And it's a very common problem that we see regulators penalizing companies because their leaflets and their labels are not up to date with the latest safety information. So in this case, AI could be a wonderful tool to help companies assess the safety data and just make sure that everything is captured and the latest information is updated in the product label. So I think that's, especially for this usage, it's really critical because we see a lot of problems around the industry with product labels not being up to date. So that's enough about the benefits. So let's talk about some of the challenges of using artificial intelligence. So one of the potential challenge was misclassification. So in some cases, maybe an event is more serious than it's classified, and it's because of wrong keywords picked. It might be classified as a lower risk than it actually is. So if you have, for example, a physician reviewing it, they might decide, well, actually, this is more serious than it was initially reported. You might have duplicated cases which are reported separately, and if the AI cannot pick up these duplicated cases, it might actually inflate your safety signal. So if you have, let's say, gastrointestinal problems typical for your drug, it could be that different for the same patients, you might have different reports which are basically the same event, but report as a slightly different term. And if you don't realize it's the same event, you might actually have like more serious adverse events than you actually in reality have in practice. So that's something that you have to think about. Another one is missed signals. So in some cases, the AI tool might see something as duplication and remove it, but actually they might be separate cases. So as we said, you might have different cases which are actually one case, but you might have the opposite as well. You might have cases which might look like duplication, but actually they're separate cases. And if you have such incident, you might miss safety information. Another important problem is automation bias. To rely too much on the AI to identify issues and have less human involvement, this is the biggest problem, because it's very tempting. You have something that it works, you see that it works, and it's very tempting to say, well, I probably don't need to be that much involved anymore because it's working without me anyway. And this is something that you need to be very careful and don't rely solely on the AI to do that assessment, and really involve humans, particularly physicians and people who understand the product in the process. And that was the core message from the regulators. You can't just have the AI doing things for you. You need to have human oversight over this process. Another problem is cybersecurity. Now, there are different aspects of cybersecurity. So if you have the company where they have all their products and they use AI to assess their safety information, it's specific for the company. But for example, if you have a regulator where they have different products from different companies and it's all fed into one model, AI model, then I believe the regulators are at much bigger risk than the pharma companies from cybersecurity attacks and what happens if someone has access to their databases. So I think cybersecurity is a serious issue that companies and regulators need to think about and make sure that they have the adequate security and there's no data leak. If you have a ultra rare disease, and if you collect information, it could be a risk potentially for disclosing information for the patients if you have a hack. Another important challenge with AI is the AI model influencing pharmacovigilance activities. Now here we're talking about identifying priorities. It could be that the AI model could give you information which make you think that something is relevant and you need to follow on it, but actually it might not be that relevant. So that's one of the potential examples that we can give you about this. And another thing that was discussed, particularly by Health Canada, was outsourcing vendors to perform pharmacovigilance and then having this passive monitoring on what people do. This is a very big challenge, particularly for small companies where they outsource their operations and they often hire someone to do the pharmacovigilance and drug safety monitoring for them. that these companies don't necessarily always have oversight, and if their vendor use AI and how they use AI and all that, the company actually, the actual manufacturer might not necessarily have that information and the proper oversight of how this is handled. So I think this is very important for all of you and for everyone using vendors for pharmacovigilance. So the next point is to see how we can potentially address some of these challenges, because I always like to cover what can we do to prevent these things and to improve our processes. So one of the first recommendations from the regulators, and I think from us as well, is to have human oversight. You need to have someone looking at your data, analyzing trends and trying to see if everything is as expected or if there are any strange patterns and so on. Another important part is to understand that your AI model needs improvements. So it's not something static, but you need to improve it with the time. Once you have more data, you need to feed that more data into your model and do constant improvements on your model and make sure it captures the information that you need. Another part, as I also mentioned, is about the special considerations for rare patterns and events. So if you have an ultra-rare disease, as I mentioned a bit earlier, you might have some special events, or things might not behave as normal, or what you already have in the literature, or maybe sometimes you don't even have literature to support it. So you need to think of these special cases and these special diseases. Another important part is to understand the limitations of your model and to be clear about what you can achieve with your AI tool and what you cannot achieve, and have a proper risk assessment and think about it. And the last bit is really to think about protecting patients' data. As I said, if you have some very ultra-rare diseases, and if you have all that data in the system and in your AI model, this is personal patient data that could actually be identifiable. If you have very limited amount of patients with that particular disease, and if you have a cybersecurity risk, then you might have a serious trouble and problem with leaking patient personal data related to their treatment or to their medical condition. So these are things that you need to think about. One thing I forgot to mention, I think, in the usage of artificial intelligence, sorry to bring you back to that one, was that you can use AI for literature and scientific literature search. As you know, very often you have universities and sometimes hospitals conducting their own clinical trials. They might use your drug as a comparator. And so on. So you can potentially use AI for that as well, to pick up safety data from scientific publications about your product, and that could be, I think, quite useful for many companies. But now let's go to thinking about practical challenges with source data and assay reportings, and how this could make things more complicated for artificial intelligence tools to assess and analyze data. And here I'll hand over to my colleague Lydia, who will talk about some very practical problems that we see with assay reporting. So Lydia, over to you, if that's okay.
Thank you, Olga. There's some specific issues which we see in source data that could cause problems when we're using AI to analyse it. The safety events are things like adverse events and serious adverse events. And as we know from experience and from obviously the talks and things that we've been to do with AI, it's not perfect, and because it's automatic, it doesn't have the ability to process data and identify errors in the same way that a human would, at least not yet anyway. So one of the challenges would be how AI deals with missing or incomplete source data, which is obviously something that we see a lot in recording of research data. So for example, if there's multiple case notes in relation to an adverse event, but one is missing the event grading, it might not identify them as the same event, even though they are. So in this case, it might be useful to have something which flags missing or incomplete source data as part of that AI system. Another big issue would be errors in the source data, because unlike missing data, the AI can't know when something is an error. So this might include things like misspelled names and events, different reporting dates between case notes, and different narratives of the same event. So when AI is used to do something which we call case deduplication in safety data, which is where it identifies whether two or more reports refer to the same patient or event, errors in the data might make it difficult for AI to distinguish between duplicates and separate events in the case notes. So an example of this might be if a patient has an event which is referred to as anemia in one note, but a red blood cell count in another note, it might falsely categorise them as the separate events. And similarly, if there's multiple reports of a patient experiencing anemia, but one of them has an error in the start and end date, they might be reported as the same event, despite them being separate instances. So this could potentially lead to an inaccurate representation of the safety profile of an IMP, where it's over or under detecting adverse or serious adverse events due to data errors. And these issues might also become apparent when a trial is being conducted in multiple countries where there's language differences too, because you're going to see similar events being obviously referred to as different event terms. So I think it's really important to consider how exactly AI is going to be used in these kinds of circumstances to analyse safety data. And like you mentioned, Olga, human oversight is obviously always needed. So figuring out at what stage that human oversight is going to be implemented. So, for example, is AI going to be used to flag duplications to then be reviewed by a real person, or would it automatically do that itself and merge those duplications together? And in my personal opinion, it seems like the risks associated with the data errors or the missing data, which, as we know, are all too common in trial source data, would mean that AI should really only be used to flag data to avoid false positives. So if it was to be used to automatically merge these events together, it might lead to data being lost or deleted. So obviously, however it's being used, it's really important for audit trails to be in place and obviously to have data recovery processes, so it can be identified when AI does make a mistake, because that's kind of inevitable, particularly at the stage that we're at now. And of course, it's really important to track the metrics of how AI is being used. So how many mistakes has it made versus how many accurate duplications has it found, and analysing this so that you can figure out how accurate an AI model is and how suitable it is to being applied to the data that you're using. And then from that you can kind of assess the risk and identify areas where it can be improved. I think overall as well, it's important to, in general, to ensure that sites are really thorough in the collection and reporting of source data to limit these issues when it comes to AI analysis, obviously through things like monitoring. But I mean, I don't think it's reasonable to expect that data is always going to be 100% correct or complete. Obviously that's the goal, but that's just not how things work. But overall, it does seem like AI has the potential to streamline the assessment of safety data in source documents, but it should be used with caution and always with human oversight, like you mentioned before, to avoid those errors which could potentially have safety implications when you're profiling the safety of a drug.
Thank you so much, Lydia, for that. That's brilliant. Thank you again for this. Actually, you're very right. And even if you think about it, it just gave me reminded me of an example that we have. It's a very good example. Even in different regions, they report different adverse events with a different priority. So, for example, if you go to Asia, they tend to report all adverse events and everything. And if you go to, let's say, Europe, they'll see that they won't report grade 1 events. They will not consider them as significant to report them. So even if you think from a point of view of the collected data, the way the data is collected is different in different regions. So that's another complication that you need to think about when discussing your model and how you're going to use your AI tool for assessing your safety data for your drug. So you need to think about that it's not just different hospitals and different investigators report the information in a different way, but also you have different regions around the world that report the safety data in a different way. So you have a lot of variability, and these are things you need to think about when you're performing your assessments and when you're developing your AI tool, and make sure you really capture the relevant information and not all the noise that comes with it. And again, as we said, diagnosis change, narratives change, information changes, so everything could change. And you need to think about all these things when you're developing your tool and when you're analyzing your data. So always be careful and make sure you have the proper human oversight on everything you do, especially when it comes to drug safety, because that's a very important part. I hope you found this episode interesting, and thank you so much for listening.